Going through 61 different interviews across 20 companies in 6 weeks was definitely intense. But now that I've gone through it, I really wanted to put together this video to share 4 different key learnings that I had throughout the experience. But before I get into those learnings, I did just want to go over some background information. So in October of 2022, I decided to resign from my startup job. And the week that I resigned was the week where we started to see a ton of different headlines of huge tech companies laying off lots of people. So when I was applying and interviewing, I knew that I really had to be on top of my stuff. Fortunately, because I had no job at the time, I was able to dedicate my full time to either preparing for interviews or actually interviewing. And I wanted to give a quick overview of the companies and positions I applied to. So I interviewed with 20 different companies ranging from Series A all the way up to public companies, tech companies with thousands of employees. And in terms of the jobs I was targeting, I was looking into native mobile jobs, a couple growth product management roles, as well as just general web product management jobs. So I had 20 first round recruiter calls, I did 14 hiring manager calls, and I had about 5 final round panel interviews that ranged from like 3 to 6 or 7 at sometimes different interviews. I also did 4 case presentations and case studies that I either sent in to the hiring manager, or I did a panel interview or jam session in certain cases for one of the presentations. So in total, I spent about 35 hours in interviews, and then I also spent another probably 40 hours either preparing for interviews or doing those case studies and preparing those presentations. So from all these interviews, I really came away with 4 big learnings that I wanted to jump into now. So one of the biggest learnings I had is that small companies and big companies are very different during the interview process. Big companies are looking for a very different type of product manager than a small company or a startup, and they will base the interview off of this. So big companies really want to see candidates who are very good at stakeholder management and cross-functional work that spans across many different teams, many different months. Whereas a smaller company, they really want product managers who are comfortable getting into the details, getting into the nitty-gritty, and getting their hands dirty, as opposed to relying on different members across the team that are more skilled in a specific job function, such as user research or copywriting, etc. As a result, big companies will really want to hear, and they'll ask questions that align to what your job function actually will be. For example, they really won't be interested in hearing about how you responded to customer support tickets in your last startup, because that task would simply be done by another team and other specialized individuals. They will want to hear that you actually were able to successfully launch products and work with a bunch of different stakeholders across different teams to really get a product out and it be successful. Whereas a smaller company will actually be less interested in knowing that you were able to corral like 8 different stakeholders or teams to launch a support strategy, for example, because their problems in a small company aren't going to be as large as that. They want the product managers to be able to get into the details and be very self-sufficient and solve problems by themselves. The second way that big companies and small companies are different is in the actual interview process itself. So big companies will take between 1 and 3 months between the first call and the offer, whereas a small company may take, a couple of weeks between the first call and that offer. And this means that in between each session or each interview, there may be a couple weeks in between where you're not sure the status of your application. And so if you really are interested in applying to both big and small companies, I would recommend starting with the big companies at least a month early so that you can phase out your interviews so that if you do get offers at the end, they're aligned and you can pick the best choice for you. But if you start with the small companies and big companies, you potentially will get an offer from a small company much earlier and not able to actually finish the interview process with a big company. The next important lesson I learned is the significance of what I call having 4-vector fit. And those 4 vectors are industry, technology, business model, and role. And I will describe what those are. So industry fit. Companies want candidates who have experience in their industry. For example, if it's a fintech company, they will ideally look for candidates who have a background in finance or fintech so that they can really ramp up quickly. Technology fit. There is a ton of different technologies that are used out there, from native mobile to machine learning, and companies will want to make sure that you have at least some experience in the technology that they use. Business model fit. There's so many different types of business models out there, ranging from content platforms that run off of ad revenue. You could have a subscription service. You could do a three-way marketplace where, like Uber Eats, where you have drivers, restaurants, and the customers. And the company is gonna wanna make sure that you at least have knowledge or have experience in that specific type of business model, because there's lots of different scenarios where that knowledge will be really impactful in your role. And finally, role fit. There's so many different types of product manager jobs, from native mobile roles to platform roles to growth roles. And again, each one of those types of roles has nuances to them. Growth, for example, is really focused on experimentation and a strong understanding of analytics, whereas native mobile product manager really has to understand the nuances when it comes to launching and maintaining a mobile app. So it's really important that the candidate has at least some, if not all, of these 4 vectors when they're applying to companies. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I interviewed and applied for growth roles, native mobile roles, general web, product management roles. And for the native mobile roles, I found that the companies were really looking for candidates who had a lot of years experience with native mobile, whereas I just had a few at the beginning of my career. So what ended up happening is that the companies would pass up on me in favor of a candidate who has done native mobile their entire career, which from the company's perspective makes sense. That candidate is more de-risked from their perspective because they have a lot of experience with the technology that they have and they're using in their company. So if you really want to work in a company and a role where you don't have this 4-vector fit, it is still possible, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult. During the interview process, you're really going to have to communicate how you may be deficient in one area, but you've maybe taken a course on the side or did a side project that really helped you hone those skills to be a very strong product manager in that role. And with that being said, if you're not moved forward for a role, really look back and say, did I have all these 4 vectors for this role? And if you didn't, I wouldn't take it personally, because it's very possible that another candidate in the pipeline did have all 4 of those fits, and the company just viewed that candidate as being a lot more de-risked. The third key thing I learned is really the importance of communicating value and impact over the details when it comes to telling stories. So you may be familiar with the STAR framework. S is for situation. What is the background and context of the problem or project you're working on? T is for task. What needed to be done with it? A is for action. What steps were taken to accomplish the goal? And what R is for results, or what was the end result and impact of the project? And what I learned is that the most impactful way of telling a story using the STAR framework is to really start with the result as a hook to get the interviewer engaged, and then you go into the details and go into the background. So for example, starting with this, sure, I'd love to tell you about a time I increased our conversion rate by 40%, versus starting with, yeah, so our team was really struggling to figure out what to work on, and we had a lot of different options. There's a clear difference between those two answers, and in the first example, there's a really strong hook that gets that interviewer engaged and really curious, like, how did this candidate actually increase that conversion rate? So it's really important to start with a hook so you can get their attention and then go into the details and outline what was the initial problem, what steps did you take, and again, revisit that result at the end to really drive home the point that you too can make a result and impact at the company that you're interviewing for. For example, in my interviews, I told a story about how I decreased our customer support request rate by 50%. And instead of starting with, let me tell you about a time I shipped a customer support feature, I actually conveyed and told the interviewer what the end result was for the company, which is a lot more interesting than just saying that I shipped something. In product, it's really important that you focus on outcomes as opposed to output. In this example, the output is the fact that I just shipped a customer support feature, but the outcome is actually what happened to the business. And in this case, we decreased our customer support request rate by 50%, which which is a really big change. The fourth and final big learning is about how to identify red flags in a company and your manager. It is absolutely critical in terms of how happy you're gonna be and productive you'll be in your role if you are able to identify these red flags and avoid bad fits. According to a McKinsey study, about 40% of people who quit their jobs are doing so because of the lack of career development in their roles. And this ties directly to both the company and your manager. And so it's really important in the interview process to identify these red flags so that you can avoid bad fits. To identify red flags, you really should come up with a list of questions that you can ask every single interviewer that you come across, and you'd be able to compare notes across these. So some examples of this are, how is success measured within your company? Or how do you do planning? Is it top down or bottom up? What does the feedback loop look like between the customers and the product? How much autonomy do the product teams have in making decisions? What are some challenges the team is facing, and what are some challenges the company is facing? Can you describe your management style? Or how do you handle conflict between teams? And a few of my favorites are, can you tell me about something that you really love about working at this company? Or can you tell me some area where you really think the company or the team should improve in? And these really identify on a more personal level what that employee really thinks about the company. Additionally, during the interview process, it's important to look at the company overall. So are they making different hiring decisions, like hiring a lot of people really fast, or have they been really slow in hiring and what that could signal? As well as different challenges that they have maybe with yearly planning processes. In my own interviews, I asked why a company had downsized by 30 people in the last 6 months, and the answer that was given did not instill confidence in me that this would be a stable role, so I stopped that process. Similarly, in another set of interviews with a company, I asked each interviewer what is the biggest challenge that the team faces every year, and each one of them said yearly planning, which indicates to me that this is a really big problem in the company. And even though the company had gone public and had thousands of employees, the fact that they hadn't figured out yearly planning was definitely a big red flag that really affected all the product managers on the team. So all in all, it's really important that you identify these red flags during the interview process so that you can avoid bad companies or bad fits. You know, we spend so much time in these companies and in these roles that we want to make sure that we're happy, we're enjoying the product, we're moving up in our careers, and we're gaining valuable experience. So the interview process is really a two-way street, and you want to ask these critical questions as opposed to potentially people-pleasing during the interview process to make sure that you are really confident about this role and this company. Before I summarize my key learnings from this interview process, if you found value out of this, I'd really appreciate if you could like or subscribe to my channel. So to summarize, here are the key takeaways from this video. One is that big companies really are different from small companies, both in the way that they interview you in that process and also the candidates that they're looking for. The second is that 4-vector fit: industry, technology, business model, and role function. It's really important that you identify companies and roles that align to your background so that you have the best chance of getting an offer. The third is around highlighting impact in your answers. It's crucial that you convey to the interviewer that you can provide value to their company as well. And finally, identify red flags. It's really important that during the interview process, you ask the right questions to get at red flags that may impact your overall career trajectory. In future videos, I'll provide tips and tricks on how to succeed in the product management interview process and get an offer that really aligns to your values, your background and skill set, and will help you progress in your career. And if you have any questions about any of the stuff that I talked about in this video, please feel free to ask in the comment section below and I will get back to you. Thank you so much for watching.